Elena White pushed through the glass door of Petals and Dreams, the bronze bell above chiming its familiar welcome. The floriculture shop's scent of roses and jasmine wrapped around her after another exhausting day of deliveries across Chicago. At 24, she'd grown accustomed to the ache in her feet and the permanent floral perfume that clung to her work clothes. The afternoon had been particularly brutal. 5 wedding consultations, 3 funeral arrangements, and a bridezilla who'd changed her color scheme 4 times. Elena's temples throbbed with the kind of headache that only came from dealing with demanding customers while maintaining professional composure. Another 14-hour shift, she muttered, pulling her chestnut waves from the messy bun that had barely survived the chaos. The shop felt empty without Mrs. Henderson, the elderly owner who'd taken a chance on an orphaned girl 3 years ago. Elena had learned everything about flower arrangements through trial and countless errors. She moved through closing duties, checking each arrangement for wilted petals and refreshing water in the display buckets. Elena took pride in maintaining the shop's reputation for quality, even when exhaustion made every movement feel laborious. The phone's shrill ring pierced the evening quiet. Elena glanced at the antique clock mounted between arrangements. 7:45. Most customers rarely called this late, but desperate romantics occasionally needed rescue from their own poor planning. Petals and Dreams, this is Elena speaking. How may I help you? The voice that responded carried a thick accent, perhaps Eastern European, with an undertone that seemed almost menacing despite the polite words. Something about the cadence felt controlled, as if every syllable had been carefully measured. I need delivery tomorrow morning. Very specific order. Elena grabbed the worn notepad beside the register, her green eyes scanning the already packed schedule. Adding another delivery meant starting even earlier than usual, but late-night calls often paid better than regular orders. Of course, sir. What type of arrangement were you looking for? 12 black roses. Nothing else. Just black roses. Elena's pen paused mid-stroke. Black roses weren't common requests, requiring special techniques that made them significantly more expensive. Most customers settled for deep red alternatives when they discovered the cost. Black roses are quite unique, sir. May I ask what occasion this arrangement is for? Sometimes I can suggest similar alternatives that might work better for your budget. No alternatives. 12 black roses. Money is not concerned. The firmness suggested this wasn't negotiable. Elena scribbled the details, already calculating logistics. She'd need to contact her specialty supplier first thing tomorrow morning, which meant an earlier start and potentially higher costs for rush ordering. I'll need to check availability with my supplier, but I should be able to accommodate that request. May I have your name and delivery address? Address is 1247 Lakeshore Avenue. Large iron gates you cannot miss. Mansion with stone lions at entrance. Elena knew that address. Everyone in Chicago knew that neighborhood. Lakeshore Avenue housed some of the city's most expensive mansions, where old money and new wealth created an enclave of privacy and luxury that regular people only glimpsed through magazine spreads. And your name for the order, sir? Name is not important. You deliver to front gate, leave with security, collect payment. $200 cash. $200. Elena's hand tightened around the phone. That amount would cover her rent for the week and leave enough for groceries and the electric bill sitting unpaid on her kitchen counter. She never questioned customers who paid generously for expedited service, especially when her bank account remained perpetually balanced on disaster's edge. That's perfectly fine, sir. The delivery will be completed by 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Is there any specific message you'd like included? No message. No card. Just roses. Very important they arrive exactly as ordered. The line went dead before Elena could confirm additional details. She stared at the receiver for several seconds, unease creeping through her tired mind like cold fingers. Something about the conversation felt off, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what triggered her discomfort. The accent, the urgency, the specific request without context. Most customers provided background for their orders: anniversary flowers, apology arrangements, sympathy bouquets. There was usually context that helped Elena select appropriate presentation. This request felt oddly sterile, almost clinical in its specificity. Elena shook her head, dismissing her concerns as exhaustion-induced paranoia. Wealthy clients often behaved differently than her usual customers. They were accustomed to having requests fulfilled without explanation. The generous payment suggested someone who valued efficiency over friendliness. She finished her closing routine, double-checking locks and setting the security system. Walking to her modest Honda Civic parked behind the shop, Elena mentally calculated tomorrow's schedule. The black rose delivery would need to happen first, before heat could damage the delicate petals. The drive home took her through Chicago's quieter residential streets, past small businesses closing for the night. Elena loved this city despite its challenges. She'd grown up in various foster homes throughout the metropolitan area, but Chicago itself felt like the only constant in her life. As she navigated toward her apartment, Elena couldn't shake the memory of that accented voice requesting 12 black roses with such specific insistence. She'd worked with flowers long enough to know different varieties carried symbolic meanings, though she'd never bothered learning all the details. But black roses seemed to carry darker implications. The thought nagged at her as she climbed stairs to her second-floor apartment, keys jingling against the metal railing. Whatever symbolic meaning those flowers carried, her job was simple: deliver the arrangement, collect the payment, move on to the next customer. Elena had learned long ago that curiosity about clients' personal lives only led to complications she couldn't afford. Her apartment welcomed her with familiar simplicity. A small but clean space she'd made comfortable through careful budgeting. Fresh flowers from the shop's surplus brightened the windowsill, and photographs from her few friendships created warmth on otherwise bare walls. Elena heated leftover pasta and reviewed tomorrow's deliveries one final time. The mysterious order for 1247 Lakeshore Avenue sat at the top of her list, circled in red ink. $200 for 12 black roses and a short drive to an expensive neighborhood. It seemed almost too good to be true. She finished her simple dinner and prepared for bed, setting her alarm for 5 a.m. to accommodate the early supplier call. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but also opportunities. Elena had survived worse situations through determination and careful planning. As she settled into sleep, Elena remained unaware that her acceptance of that strange phone order had set in motion events that would completely transform her quiet life. The black roses she would deliver tomorrow morning carried a meaning far more dangerous than she could possibly imagine, and the mansion behind those iron gates held secrets that would soon make her a target in a world she never knew existed. The rumble of engines outside Elena's modest apartment building cut through her morning routine like thunder through clear skies. She'd been awake since 5 a.m., successfully securing 12 pristine black roses from her specialty supplier and carefully arranging them in elegant black tissue paper. The delivery was scheduled for 9:30, giving her plenty of time to complete the mysterious order and move on to her regular appointments. But the sound outside her kitchen window wasn't the usual traffic noise of Chicago's morning commute. This was deeper, more deliberate, the synchronized purring of multiple powerful engines that seemed to vibrate through the building's thin walls. Elena paused mid-sip of her coffee, green eyes narrowing as she approached the window overlooking the street below. 3 black SUVs sat parked along the curb directly in front of her building, their tinted windows reflecting the early morning sunlight like dark mirrors. The vehicles looked expensive, pristine, and completely out of place in her working-class neighborhood where most residents drove decade-old sedans held together by hope and duct tape. Elena's heart skipped as she watched men in dark suits emerge from the vehicles with military precision. They moved like soldiers, scanning the area with practiced eyes, before positioning themselves strategically around the building's entrance. One man spoke quietly into what appeared to be a radio or earpiece, his words inaudible from 3 stories up, but his posture radiating authority and purpose. "What the hell?" Elena whispered, backing away from the window. Her first instinct was to grab her phone and call the police, but something held her back. The men below didn't appear threatening in an obvious way. No visible weapons, no aggressive gestures. They simply stood there, waiting, like marble statues guarding an ancient temple. Heavy footsteps echoed through the building's stairwell, growing closer with each passing second. Elena's breathing quickened as she realized the footsteps were climbing steadily toward her floor. The building had 12 apartments spread across 4 floors, but somehow she knew with absolute certainty that these visitors were coming for her. 3 sharp knocks resonated through her apartment door with the force of authority. Elena stood frozen in her kitchen, coffee mug trembling in her hands as she stared at the door that suddenly seemed as fragile as paper. She'd lived in this building for 2 years without incident, knew all her neighbors by name, and had never experienced anything remotely resembling this level of intimidation. Miss White. The voice from the hallway carried an accent she recognized immediately. The same Eastern European inflection from last night's phone call. "We need to speak with you. Please open the door." Elena's mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Had she unknowingly delivered drugs hidden in flower arrangements? Was she connected to some crime through her work at the floriculture shop? The rational part of her brain insisted this had to be a misunderstanding, but the primal fear coursing through her veins suggested otherwise. "I don't know what you want," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "But I'm calling the police right now. Miss White, you delivered black roses yesterday to 1247 Lakeshore Avenue. We need to discuss this delivery. Nothing more." Elena's blood turned to ice water. The black roses, the mysterious phone order, the generous payment that had seemed too good to be true. Yesterday's strange unease crystallized into stark terror as she realized her instincts had been warning her about danger she couldn't have imagined. "I don't understand. It was just a flower delivery. I left them with security like the customer requested. Please open the door, Miss White. We prefer to discuss this matter privately rather than involving your neighbors in what could become complicated." The subtle threat in those words sent Elena scrambling toward her bedroom, where she grabbed her phone with shaking hands. But before she could dial 911, another voice cut through the hallway, deeper, more commanding than the first. This new voice carried power that seemed to penetrate the door itself. Elena White. Just her name, spoken with quiet authority that made her freeze completely. There was something about this voice that demanded attention, respect, and perhaps even fear. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but it carried weight that the other voice had lacked. "You will open this door. Now." Elena found herself walking toward the door despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Her hand moved to the deadbolt as if controlled by some external force. Through the peephole, she could see a tall figure in an expensive charcoal suit, his face partially obscured by shadows, but radiating presence that filled the narrow hallway. The man was younger than she'd expected, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair perfectly styled and a jawline that could have been carved from marble. His eyes, visible even through the distorted peephole lens, were the most striking feature. Pale blue-gray like winter storms, and completely devoid of warmth. This wasn't someone who asked for things twice. "Miss White, I am Pietro De Luca. You delivered a very specific message to my home yesterday. A message that could have gotten you killed if my security hadn't been thorough in their investigation. Pietro De Luca." The name meant nothing to Elena, but the way he spoke it suggested it should. His English was perfect despite the slight accent, each word chosen carefully and delivered with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Elena's hand hovered over the door handle, every survival instinct warring with curiosity and a strange compulsion to face whatever waited on the other side. She'd spent her entire life avoiding trouble, keeping her head down, staying invisible. But somehow, a simple flower delivery had thrust her into something far beyond her understanding or control. "I don't know what message you're talking about. Someone called the shop, ordered black roses, and I delivered them. That's all. I run a legitimate business. Black roses, Miss White, carry a very specific meaning in certain circles. They represent death, termination, the end of someone's existence. When 12 black roses appear at my front gate, it means someone wants me dead and is announcing their intention publicly." Elena's knees nearly buckled as the implication hit her. She'd unwittingly delivered a death threat to someone powerful enough to mobilize armed men and track her down within hours. The generous payment, the mysterious customer, the late-night phone call. It had all been part of something far more dangerous than a simple floral arrangement. "But I didn't know," she whispered, pressing her forehead against the door. "I swear I didn't know what it meant. Someone just called and placed an order. I thought it was for a funeral or maybe a Gothic wedding. I never would have—" "Open the door, Elena." The use of her first name, spoken with quiet intimacy, somehow made the command even more compelling. Elena turned the deadbolt with numb fingers, her mind struggling to process how her simple life had transformed into something from a nightmare. The door swung open to reveal Pietro De Luca in all his intimidating presence. He was even more striking in person than through the peephole. Tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying himself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to doubt his own power. His suit probably cost more than Elena made in 3 months, and the watch on his wrist could have paid her rent for a year. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Intelligent, calculating, and completely focused on her, as if she were the most important thing in his world at this moment. "You're going to come with me," Pietro said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We need to discuss who placed that order and why they used your shop to send me a message. Your life may depend on how cooperative you choose to be." Behind him, Elena could see 2 other men in expensive suits, their positions carefully chosen to block any escape routes. Whatever world she'd accidentally stumbled into, there was no backing out now. The black roses she'd delivered so innocently had sealed her fate and tied her to Pietro De Luca in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. Elena looked into those pale eyes and realized her quiet life was over. Whatever came next would either destroy her completely or transform her into someone she'd never imagined becoming. The only certainty was that there was no going back to the simple existence she'd known just 24 hours ago. The De Luca mansion rose before Elena like something from a Gothic novel, all stone and shadows against the gray Chicago morning. Wrought iron gates that had seemed impressive from the street now loomed overhead as the black SUV passed through, their intricate metalwork depicting twisted vines and thorns that seemed to writhe in her peripheral vision. Elena sat rigid in the leather back seat, acutely aware of Pietro's presence beside her and the armed man in the front passenger seat who hadn't spoken a single word during the 20-minute drive. The mansion itself defied every expectation she'd formed about wealthy homes. Where she'd imagined gaudy displays of nouveau riche excess, she instead found understated elegance that spoke of generations of accumulated power. The limestone facade was weathered but pristine, with tall windows that reflected the morning light like watchful eyes. Perfectly manicured lawns stretched in every direction, broken only by marble statues and fountain features that probably cost more than most people's houses. "Impressive, isn't it?" Pietro's voice carried a note of pride as he followed her gaze. "My great-grandfather built this place in 1924. He believed in creating something that would last for centuries, a legacy that couldn't be destroyed by temporary setbacks or changing fortunes." Elena said nothing, her throat too tight with fear to form coherent responses. Every detail she absorbed: the security cameras mounted discreetly among ornamental trees, the men positioned strategically around the grounds, the subtle fortifications disguised as decorative elements, reinforced the growing realization that she'd stumbled into a world where normal rules didn't apply. The SUV stopped beneath a covered portico where 2 more men in dark suits waited with military precision. One opened Pietro's door, while the other attended to Elena, their movements coordinated as if they'd performed this routine countless times. Elena noticed that neither man made eye contact with her, treating her like valuable cargo that required careful handling, but didn't merit personal acknowledgement. "This way, Miss White." Pietro's hand settled at the small of her back, guiding her toward massive oak doors carved with the same thorny vine motif that decorated the gates. The touch was light, but unmistakably proprietary, as if he'd already classified her as something belonging to his domain. Elena wanted to pull away from the contact, but something about Pietro's presence made resistance feel not just futile, but actively dangerous. The mansion's interior overwhelmed her senses immediately. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness reflected light from crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow patterns across cream-colored walls. Original oil paintings in gilded frames depicted scenes of Italian countryside and formal portraits of stern-faced men who shared Pietro's distinctive features. The air itself felt different here, heavier, perfumed with expensive candles and fresh flowers that probably cost more than Elena's weekly grocery budget. "My study is this way." Pietro led her through a corridor lined with more artwork and antique furnishings that belonged in museums rather than private homes. Elena's practical mind couldn't help calculating the value of what she was seeing, and the numbers made her dizzy. This wasn't just wealth. This was empire-level resources that suggested influence extending far beyond legal business ventures. The study itself was a shrine to masculine power and old-world sophistication. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held leather-bound volumes in multiple languages, while a massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room like a throne. Behind the desk, windows overlooked gardens, where she could see more security personnel moving with purpose that suggested they were anything but decorative. "Please, sit." Pietro gestured to one of two wingback chairs positioned in front of his desk. Elena perched on the edge of the seat, ready to bolt, despite knowing that escape was impossible. Pietro moved behind his desk with fluid grace, removing his suit jacket and hanging it carefully on a brass coat rack before taking his own seat. For several long moments, he simply studied her with those unsettling pale eyes. Elena felt like a specimen under a microscope, every detail of her appearance and demeanor being catalogued and analyzed. She'd thrown on jeans and a simple sweater that morning, choosing comfort over style for what she'd expected to be a routine day of deliveries. Now she felt utterly underdressed and exposed under Pietro's scrutiny. "Tell me about yourself, Elena White." His voice was conversational, almost friendly. But Elena detected steel beneath the silk. 24 years old, orphaned at 16, worked your way through community college while living in foster care. Currently employed at Petals and Dreams floriculture shop, where you've worked for 3 years. No criminal record, no outstanding debts beyond normal living expenses, no romantic entanglements. A remarkably clean and simple life. Elena's blood chilled as she realized he'd investigated her thoroughly enough to know details she'd never shared with anyone. "How do you know all that?" "It's my business to know things, especially when someone delivers death threats to my home." Pietro leaned forward slightly, his gaze never wavering. "The question isn't how I know about you, Elena. The question is whether you're as innocent as your background suggests, or whether someone recruited you specifically because you appeared harmless. Recruited me for what? I told you I just work at a flower shop. Someone called, placed an order, and I delivered it. I had no idea what black roses meant in your world. My world." Pietro's lips curved in what might have been amusement. "And what world do you think that is exactly?" Elena swallowed hard, finally voicing what had been growing clearer with every passing minute. "You're Mafia, aren't you? The security, the mansion, the way everyone acts around you. You're some kind of crime boss. I prefer businessman, but your assessment isn't entirely inaccurate." Pietro's admission was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. The DeLuca family has various interests throughout Chicago and beyond. Some of those interests exist in gray areas that law enforcement finds problematic. Elena's hands trembled in her lap. "And someone used my flower shop to threaten you." "Precisely. The caller who placed that order knew exactly what message he was sending. Black roses at my gate announce intention to kill. A formal declaration of war between organizations. It's an old tradition, one that carries serious consequences for everyone involved. But I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea." Pietro opened a leather folder on his desk and slid several photographs across the mahogany surface toward Elena. "These were taken outside your apartment building over the past 3 weeks. Tell me if you recognize the man in the car." Elena's breath caught as she studied the surveillance photos. They showed her modest street from multiple angles, but in each image, the same dark sedan was parked in different positions with a clear view of her building. In one photo, she could make out a figure behind the wheel, middle-aged, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast day, with sharp features that suggested Eastern European heritage. "I've never seen him before," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone was watching me? For weeks. Long before the phone call to your shop. This suggests your involvement wasn't random, Elena. Someone specifically chose you as their messenger, probably because your background makes you appear innocent and unconnected to organized crime." Elena felt sick as the implications crashed over her. "You think someone set me up, used me to deliver a death threat without my knowledge." "I don't think, Elena, I know." Pietro gathered the photographs back into the folder. "The question now is what we do about it. You've seen my face, been in my home, learned things about my business that outsiders aren't meant to know. Under normal circumstances, that would create problems for both of us. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Elena understood that she'd crossed a line from which there might be no return. Her simple life, her quiet existence, her carefully maintained distance from trouble, All of it had been shattered by one phone call and a dozen black roses. "What are you going to do to me?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. Pietro studied her for another long moment, something unreadable flickering in those pale eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that surprised her. "That depends on you, Elena. You can help me find out who used you as their unwitting messenger, or you can become a liability that needs to be managed. The choice is yours. But understand that there's no returning to your old life either way. You know too much now to simply walk away and pretend this never happened." Elena closed her eyes, realizing that her world had fundamentally changed in ways she was still struggling to comprehend. Whatever happened next would transform her from Elena White the florist into something else entirely, either Pietro De Luca's ally or his victim. The only certainty was that her quiet, ordinary life was gone forever. The safe house was nothing like Elena had imagined. Tucked away in an upscale suburb 40 minutes from the city, it appeared to be an ordinary 2-story colonial home with white shutters and a carefully maintained garden. But appearances were deceiving. The windows were bulletproof, the doors reinforced with steel, and security cameras monitored every approach angle. Pietro had explained this during the drive while Elena sat in stunned silence, trying to process how her life had transformed from mundane to life-threatening in less than 24 hours. "You'll be comfortable here," Pietro said as they walked through the front door, his hand still positioned protectively at the small of her back. "Maria keeps the house stocked with everything you might need." Maria turned out to be a stern-faced woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Pietro with respectful familiarity, but studied Elena with barely concealed suspicion, as if trying to determine whether this newcomer represented threat or burden to their carefully ordered world. "The guest suite is ready, Mr. De Luca," Maria said, her accent similar to Pietro's but more pronounced. "Giuseppe has completed the perimeter check, and we have men positioned at all access points." Elena listened to this exchange with growing dread. The casual discussion of armed guards and security protocols reinforced how completely she'd left her normal world behind. 3 days ago, her biggest concern had been making rent on time. Now she was hiding from people who wanted to kill her for reasons she still didn't fully understand. The guest suite occupied the entire second floor, consisting of a spacious bedroom, private bathroom, and sitting area with windows overlooking the garden. The furnishings were expensive but not ostentatious. Comfortable chairs, quality linens, fresh flowers that reminded Elena painfully of her abandoned life at Petals and Dreams. "I can't stay here indefinitely," Elena said, as Pietro conducted a brief inspection of the rooms. "I have a job, responsibilities. People will notice if I just disappear. Your responsibilities have changed," Pietro replied without looking at her. He was checking window locks, with practiced efficiency. His movements those of someone accustomed to thinking about security, even in supposedly safe environments. "Maria will retrieve whatever you need from your apartment. As for your job, I've arranged for you to take medical leave due to a family emergency." Elena stared at him. "You can't just rearrange my life without asking." Pietro finally turned to face her, those pale eyes holding an intensity that made her step back involuntarily. "Elena, 3 hours ago someone bombed Petals and Dreams. The entire shop is gone along with half the block. If you'd been at work this morning instead of delivering black roses, you'd be dead." The words hit Elena like physical blows. Her shop, Mrs. Henderson's shop, destroyed. The place where she'd learned everything about flowers, where she'd built something resembling stability after years of foster care uncertainty. Gone, eliminated as casually as erasing chalk from a blackboard. "Mrs. Henderson," Elena whispered, sinking into one of the chairs. "Is she wasn't there. According to our information, she was visiting her sister in Milwaukee this week. But the message is clear. Whoever orchestrated this wants to eliminate any connection between you and that phone call." Elena buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by grief and terror in equal measure. "I don't understand why someone would go this far. It was just a flower delivery. It was a death threat delivered to the most powerful crime family in Chicago," Pietro corrected grimly. "The Russians have been testing our boundaries for months, looking for weakness they can exploit. Using an innocent florist to deliver their message was psychological warfare, a way to show they could strike at us through unexpected channels." "Russians?" Elena looked up, remembering the surveillance photos and the accented voice on the phone. The man who called the shop? Viktor Kozlenko, based on voice analysis our technical people conducted. He runs the Bratva operations in the Midwest, and he's been looking for an excuse to move against us since last spring. Pietro moved to the window, gazing out at the garden where Elena could see armed figures moving among the trees. By using you to deliver the threat, he accomplished several objectives at once. Elena felt sick as the implications became clear. He made me a target. Exactly. If I'd reacted emotionally and hurt you, it would have provided justification for retaliation. If I'd ignored the threat, it would have suggested weakness. Either way, he created a situation where he could claim moral authority while advancing his territorial ambitions. But you didn't hurt me. Elena studied Pietro's profile, noting the tension in his jaw and the careful way he positioned himself to maintain visual contact with both the window and the door. Why? Pietro was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an undertone she hadn't heard before, something almost vulnerable beneath the usual authority. Because you reminded me of someone I used to be. Before this life claimed me completely, I was just a college student who wanted to study architecture and build beautiful things instead of managing an empire built on violence and fear. He turned from the window, meeting her gaze directly. Seeing your genuine confusion, your innocence, it reminded me what I'd lost. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Elena found herself looking at Pietro differently, seeing past the intimidating exterior to glimpses of the man he might have been under different circumstances. The thought that someone so powerful could harbor regrets about his path made him seem more human and somehow more dangerous simultaneously. A sharp knock at the bedroom door interrupted the moment. "Mr. De Luca," came Giuseppe's voice from the hallway. "We have movement on the perimeter. 3 vehicles approaching from the east road." Pietro's entire demeanor shifted instantly, the vulnerable man disappearing as the crime boss reasserted control. "Stay here," he commanded Elena, his hand moving automatically to check the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Whatever happens, don't leave this room until I come back for you." "Pietro, wait." Elena stood, surprising herself by using his first name. "What if you don't come back?" He paused at the doorway, something unreadable flickering across his features. "Then Maria will know what to do. She's been with my family for 20 years, and she won't let anything happen to you. Why do you care what happens to me?" The question escaped before Elena could stop it. "I'm nobody special, just someone who got caught in the middle of your war." Pietro studied her for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. "You're wrong about that, Elena. You're exactly what I've been looking for without knowing I was searching. Someone real in a world of carefully constructed lies. Someone who still believes in beautiful things." Before Elena could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the sound of men moving through the house with military precision and the growing certainty that whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether her new life would continue or end before it truly began. Through the bulletproof windows, Elena could see muzzle flashes in the darkness as the safe house came under attack. The war between the families had found them, and she was trapped in the middle of violence she'd never chosen, but could no longer avoid. All she could do was wait and hope that Pietro's promise of protection would prove stronger than Viktor Kozlenko's determination to eliminate everyone connected to the Black Roses that had started this deadly game. The gunfire had stopped 2 hours ago, but Elena still flinched at every small sound from the darkened house below. She'd spent the time pressed against the far wall of her room, away from the bulletproof windows, listening to shouted commands in Italian and the occasional burst of automatic weapons fire that made her heart skip beats. Now silence filled the safe house like a held breath, and the waiting was almost worse than the violence had been. When footsteps finally approached her door, Elena grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from the desk, her only available weapon against whatever might come through that door. The soft knock that followed was almost anticlimactic after the terror of the past few hours. "Elena, it's Pietro. May I come in?" Relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. She set down the paperweight with shaking hands and opened the door to find Pietro standing in the hallway, his expensive suit torn and blood-stained, his left arm hanging at an awkward angle that suggested injury. But he was alive, and the pale eyes that met hers held exhaustion, rather than the cold emptiness she'd feared might be all that remained after the battle. "You're hurt," Elena said, her practical instincts overriding everything else. "Let me look at that arm. It's nothing serious. A bullet graze and some strained muscles from diving for cover." Pietro attempted to shrug, but winced at the movement. Giuseppe handled the situation efficiently. "The Russians won't be bothering us again tonight." Elena didn't ask what "handled the situation" meant. She was learning that Pietro's world operated by different rules, where violence was a negotiating tool, and death was sometimes the only acceptable resolution to disagreements. Instead, she focused on what she could control: the bleeding cut on his forehead and the way he favored his injured arm. "Sit down," she commanded, gesturing toward the chair by the window. "You need medical attention, and I'm the closest thing to a nurse you're going to find tonight." Pietro's eyebrows rose at her tone. "Are you giving me orders, Elena?" "Yes, I am. You saved my life tonight, which means I get to return the favor by making sure you don't bleed to death from stubbornness." Elena moved to the bathroom, gathering towels and the first aid kit she'd noticed earlier. Besides, someone needs to clean those wounds properly before they get infected. To her surprise, Pietro complied without further argument, settling into the chair with careful movements that revealed more injuries than he'd initially admitted. Elena approached him slowly, suddenly aware of the intimacy required to tend his wounds and the way the lamplight played across his sharp features. "This is going to sting," Elena warned, as she dabbed antiseptic on the cut above his eyebrow. Pietro remained perfectly still under her ministrations, his pale eyes never leaving her face as she worked. The intensity of his gaze made her hands tremble slightly, but she forced herself to focus on cleaning the wound thoroughly. "Where did you learn to do this?" Pietro asked quietly. "Foster care teaches you basic medical skills quickly. When you're bounced between homes with different rules and resources, you learn to take care of yourself and others." Elena moved to examine his injured arm, carefully rolling up his torn sleeve to reveal a bullet graze along his bicep. "I spent 2 years with a foster mother who was a retired army medic. She made sure I knew how to handle emergency situations. The system failed you." There was anger in Pietro's voice, but Elena sensed it wasn't directed at her. Children shouldn't have to learn survival skills before they learn to drive. "The system isn't perfect, but it kept me alive until I could make my own way." Elena began cleaning the bullet wound, noting how Pietro controlled his breathing to manage the pain without showing weakness. "Some of my foster families were wonderful people doing their best in difficult circumstances. Others weren't. Tell me about the ones who weren't." Pietro's request was quiet, but carried unmistakable command. Elena realized he wasn't making conversation. He was gathering information about her past, learning what had shaped her into the woman treating his wounds with gentle competence. The Hendersons were the worst. They took in kids for the monthly payments but provided minimal care in return. 3 of us shared a basement room with no heat, and we were expected to earn our keep through household labor and babysitting their biological children. Elena's voice remained steady as she recounted memories she rarely shared. "I was 14, and I learned to make meals from whatever expired food they bought in bulk. I learned to mend clothes until they fell apart completely. Mostly, I learned that survival meant being useful enough to keep, but invisible enough to avoid attention." Pietro's jaw tightened as he processed this information. "How long were you with them?" 18 months, until Mrs. Henderson tried to rent me out to her brother for weekend babysitting that had nothing to do with children." Elena finished bandaging Pietro's arm and moved back to check his forehead wound. "I ran away that night and didn't go back. Social services moved me to a different placement after that. And the better families?" Elena's expression softened. "The Garcias were incredible. Maria and Roberto had raised 5 children of their own and decided they wanted to help kids who needed temporary homes. They taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to care for each other even when it's difficult." She paused in her work, her eyes distant with memory. "Maria taught me to cook authentic Mexican food, and Roberto helped me with homework every night even after working double shifts at the factory. They wanted to adopt me, but what? Roberto got laid off when the factory moved production overseas. They couldn't afford the legal fees for adoption, and the state moved me to another placement before they could save enough money." Elena resumed cleaning Pietro's forehead cut, using the familiar motions to steady herself. I still send them Christmas cards. They have 7 grandchildren now, and Maria always includes pictures with her letters. Pietro was quiet for several minutes, watching Elena work with careful precision. When she finally stepped back to assess her handiwork, he caught her wrist gently, preventing her from moving away completely. "You understand loyalty," he said, his pale eyes studying her face intently. "Real loyalty, not the kind that can be bought or intimidated into existence. It's rare in my world. Your world seems to run on fear and obligation. That's not the same thing as loyalty." Elena didn't pull away from his grip, but she met his gaze directly. "The people who've earned my loyalty did it by showing they cared about me as a person, not as someone useful to their purposes. And what would it take for me to earn that kind of loyalty from you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Elena studied Pietro's face in the lamplight, noting the exhaustion that made his features appear younger and more vulnerable. Bloodstained and injured, he looked less like the intimidating crime boss who'd appeared at her door that morning, and more like a man carrying burdens he couldn't share with anyone else. "Stop treating me like a problem to be managed," Elena said finally. "I'm not a business asset or a potential liability. I'm a person who got dragged into your war without choosing sides. If you want my cooperation, start by acknowledging that I have my own thoughts, feelings, and opinions about what's happening to my life." Pietro's grip on her wrist loosened, but he didn't release her completely. "You're right. I've been thinking tactically instead of personally, treating you like a chess piece instead of a woman whose entire world has been turned upside down. And what happens now? Do I spend the rest of my life hiding in safe houses while you fight wars with people who want to kill me for delivering flowers? No." Pietro's voice carried quiet determination. "Now we end this permanently. Kozlenko made a mistake when he targeted you. He gave me personal motivation to destroy him completely instead of simply defending territory. Tomorrow we're going to find him and make sure he never threatens you again." Elena felt something shift in the air between them, a sense of partnership forming despite the dangerous circumstances that had brought them together. For the first time since answering that fateful phone call, she felt like an active participant in her own fate, rather than a victim of forces beyond her control. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Pietro's smile was the first genuine expression she'd seen from him, transforming his entire face. "Help me plan how to use Victor's own tactics against him. After all, you understand the art of appearing harmless while being far more dangerous than anyone suspects." The revelation came during breakfast 3 days after the attack on the safe house. Elena sat across from Pietro at the marble kitchen island, sharing coffee and the kind of comfortable silence that had developed between them as they planned their response to Victor's escalating war. She'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of life under protection, the constant presence of armed guards, the bulletproof windows, the way Pietro's phone buzzed with updates about security sweeps and intelligence gathering. But nothing had prepared her for the conversation that began when Maria approached them with a thick manila folder and an expression of barely controlled anger. "I found these in Peter's apartment," Maria said, setting the folder on the counter between them. "Giuseppe's team conducted a thorough search after we received intelligence about a possible insider threat." Elena's blood chilled at the mention of Peter's name. Peter Kowalski had worked at Petals and Dreams for 6 months, starting as part-time help during their busy spring season, and gradually taking on more responsibilities as Elena trusted him with deliveries and customer service. He was quiet, reliable, and had never given her any reason to doubt his loyalty to the shop or to her personally. "Peter from the flower shop?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer from Maria's grim expression. "What kind of intelligence?" Pietro opened the folder without answering, his pale eyes scanning the contents with professional efficiency. Elena watched his face grow progressively darker as he examined whatever evidence Giuseppe's team had uncovered. Finally, he turned the folder toward her, revealing photographs, bank statements, and what appeared to be surveillance reports, written in a mixture of English and Russian. "Your friend Peter has been working for Viktor Kozlenko for 8 months, Pietro said quietly, "long before he applied for a job at your shop." Elena's hands trembled as she picked up the first photograph. It showed Peter meeting with a man she now recognized as one of Victor's associates, the same sharp-featured individual who'd been watching her apartment building for weeks. The meeting was taking place in a parking garage, and both men appeared to be exchanging money for documents. "This can't be right," Elena whispered. But even as she spoke, Pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed began falling into place. Peter's convenient availability for extra shifts, his willingness to work for slightly less than minimum wage, his interest in learning about their client list and delivery schedules. Details that had seemed like dedication now appeared sinister in retrospect. Bank records show regular payments from a shell company controlled by the Kozlenko organization. Pietro continued, his voice gentle despite the harsh reality he was revealing. $2,000 a month for information about your customers, your routines, and your personal life. Elena felt sick as she realized how thoroughly she'd been betrayed. Peter hadn't just been spying on the business. He'd been reporting on her daily habits, her financial struggles, her complete lack of connections to organized crime. Information that had made her the perfect unwitting messenger for Victor's death threat. The phone call, Elena said, understanding flooding through her. Peter would have known our usual closing routine, when I'd be alone at the shop to take late orders. Exactly. Victor needed someone who could place the Black Rose order at precisely the right time, ensuring you'd be the one to answer and accept the delivery request. Pietro's jaw tightened with controlled fury. Your friend provided them with weeks of intelligence about your schedule, your personality, even your financial desperation that would make you unlikely to refuse a generous payment. Elena stared at the surveillance photos spread across the kitchen counter, each image revealing another layer of Peter's deception. Meeting with Russian operatives, photographing delivery receipts, even taking pictures of Elena herself as she worked in the shop. The violation felt more personal than anything Victor had done directly. There's more, Maria said grimly, pulling additional documents from the folder. Phone records show Peter made 17 calls to known Kozlenko numbers in the past month. The last call was made 2 hours before the bombing of Petals and Dreams. He warned them, Elena realized, her voice barely above a whisper. He told them I wasn't at the shop that morning. The bombing wasn't meant to kill you, Pietro confirmed. It was meant to eliminate evidence of their surveillance operation and force you to rely completely on me for protection. Victor wanted to isolate you, make you dependent on my resources while he planned his next move. Elena pushed the photographs away, unable to look at more evidence of Peter's betrayal. She'd trusted him, had even covered his shifts when his girlfriend was sick, had treated him like the younger brother she'd never had. The thought that he'd been reporting on her kindness to people who wanted to use it against her made her feel foolish and naive. Where is he now? Elena asked. Pietro and Maria exchanged glances before Pietro answered. Giuseppe's team found him at a motel near O'Hare Airport with a fake passport and enough cash to disappear permanently. He was planning to leave the country tonight. Was planning? Elena caught the past tense and felt her stomach clench. What happened to him? He's alive, Pietro said carefully. But he's in a position where he can't cause any more harm to you or compromise my organization's security. Elena understood the implication without needing details. Peter was being held somewhere secure, probably undergoing interrogation about Victor's plans and the extent of the surveillance operation. In Pietro's world, betrayal carried consequences far more severe than job termination or criminal prosecution. I want to see him, Elena said suddenly. Pietro's eyebrows rose. That's not advisable. You've been through enough trauma without confronting the person who orchestrated your involvement in this situation. I need to understand why. Elena stood, pacing to the window where she could see Giuseppe's men patrolling the garden. Peter seemed genuinely friendly. He asked about my life, remembered details about things I cared about. If it was all an act, I need to know how completely I was fooled. Elena, interrogating turncoats isn't something civilians should witness. These conversations can become intense. I'm not a civilian anymore, Elena replied, turning to face Pietro with determination she didn't entirely feel. Victor made sure of that when he targeted me. If I'm going to survive in your world, I need to understand how deception works, how people can lie so convincingly that you trust them with your life. Pietro studied her for a long moment, weighing risks against her obvious need for closure. If I agree to this, you follow my lead completely. You don't react emotionally, you don't make threats, and you leave when I tell you to leave. Peter is dangerous precisely because he's skilled at manipulation. Elena nodded, though part of her wondered if she was making another mistake by trusting Pietro's judgment. But she needed answers that only Peter could provide. Needed to understand how someone could smile at her every day while systematically betraying everything she cared about. "One more thing," Pietro said as they prepared to leave. Peter wasn't working alone. The surveillance operation, the timing of Victor's moves, the coordination required, it suggests he had help from someone else close to you. Someone you haven't suspected yet. Elena's blood chilled as she realized the betrayal might extend beyond Peter. In a world where loyalty could be purchased and deception was a professional skill, anyone could be working for the enemy. Even people she'd trusted for years could be reporting on her movements, her weaknesses, her growing feelings for the man who'd become both her protector and her captor. The drive to Giuseppe's interrogation site took them through Chicago's industrial district, past abandoned warehouses and forgotten buildings where secrets could be kept and difficult conversations could occur without interruption. Elena sat beside Pietro in tense silence, preparing herself to confront the man who'd sold her trust for Russian money and nearly gotten her killed in the process. But first, she needed to understand how thoroughly she'd been deceived, and whether anyone else in her limited circle of friends and acquaintances was still working for Viktor Kozlenko. The war between the families had become personal, and Elena was determined to identify every enemy before she committed completely to Pietro's dangerous world. The warehouse where they held Viktor Kozlenko smelled of rust, motor oil, and fear. Elena gripped Pietro's hand as they walked through the maze of shipping containers and abandoned machinery, following Giuseppe's hulking form deeper into the industrial complex where Chicago's underworld conducted its most serious business. The sound of their footsteps echoed off concrete walls that had witnessed decades of violence, negotiation, and final reckonings. "Remember what I told you," Pietro murmured as they approached a reinforced door guarded by 2 armed men. "Stay calm, don't react emotionally, and trust me to handle the situation." Elena nodded, though her heart hammered against her ribs with each step closer to confronting the man who'd orchestrated the destruction of her peaceful life. 3 weeks ago, she'd been worried about rent payments and wedding consultations. Now she was walking into a confrontation with a Russian crime boss who'd used her innocence as a weapon against the man she was falling in love with. The guard stepped aside respectfully as Pietro approached, their deference absolute despite the casual way they carried automatic weapons. Giuseppe unlocked the heavy door with practiced efficiency, revealing a sparse room furnished with folding chairs, a metal table, and industrial lighting that cast harsh shadows across every surface. Viktor Kozlenko sat in the center of it all, his hands zip-tied behind the chair, his expensive suit torn and blood-stained from what had clearly been a violent capture. But his pale eyes remained defiant as they fixed on Pietro, then shifted to Elena with undisguised curiosity. Even restrained and defeated, he radiated the kind of dangerous charisma that had built a criminal empire across multiple states. "The famous Pietro De Luca," Victor said, his accent thick but his English precise. "And the little flower girl who started this whole mess. How romantic that you've brought her to witness my execution." "No one's being executed tonight, Victor." Pietro pulled out a chair for Elena before taking his own seat across from the Russian. "This is a business meeting to discuss the terms of your surrender." Victor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Surrender? You think I came to Chicago unprepared for war with your family? My men know where I am, and if I don't contact them by midnight, they'll assume I'm dead and respond accordingly." "Your men are dead," Giuseppe stated flatly from his position by the door. "We eliminated your entire Chicago operation 6 hours ago. The warehouse in Cicero, the safe houses in Chinatown, the money laundering operation in Little Village, all gone." Elena watched Victor's face carefully, noting the moment when defiance flickered into something resembling concern. Despite his bravado, he hadn't expected Pietro to move against him so comprehensively, or so quickly. The war between the families had been decided in a single coordinated strike that left Victor isolated and vulnerable. "You're lying," Victor said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "My nephew Alexei would never allow—" "Alexei is in federal custody," Pietro interrupted, "charged with arms trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence we provided to the FBI was quite compelling. He'll be lucky to see daylight before his 60th birthday." Elena realized she was witnessing the systematic dismantling of Victor's power structure. Each revelation designed to strip away his confidence, and force him to confront his complete defeat. Pietro wasn't just physically stronger. He'd outmaneuvered Victor strategically, turning the Russian's own tactics against him with devastating effectiveness. "Why am I here?" Elena asked, surprising both men with her question. "If this is about negotiating surrender terms, what do you need from me?" Victor's attention focused on her with predatory intensity. "Ah, the innocent asks the right question. You're here because Pietro wants you to see what happens to people who threaten what belongs to him. This isn't negotiation. It's demonstration. Elena doesn't belong to me," Pietro said quietly, but his pale eyes remained fixed on Victor. "She's here because she deserves to understand why her life was destroyed and who was responsible for targeting her." Such noble words from a man whose family has built an empire on violence and fear. Victor's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Did you tell her about your father, Pietro? About how he expanded the De Luca territory by eliminating entire bloodlines? About the children who died because they carried the wrong surname?" Elena felt Pietro tense beside her, recognizing that Victor was probing for emotional weakness he could exploit. But Pietro's voice remained steady when he responded. "My father's sins don't excuse yours, Victor. You targeted an innocent woman to wage psychological warfare against me. That crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Innocent?" Victor's laugh was genuinely amused. "Your little flower girl isn't as innocent as she pretends. Ask her about the fire that killed her foster parents when she was 16. Ask her why the insurance investigation was never completed." Elena's blood turned to ice water. The fire that had killed the Hendersons, her abusive foster parents who'd tried to exploit her in ways that still gave her nightmares. The blaze that had started in the basement where she'd been forced to sleep, spreading upward through the old house while the family slept. She'd barely escaped through a basement window, arriving at the fire department covered in soot and claiming she'd been staying overnight with a friend. "That's enough," Pietro said, his voice carrying a warning that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. But Victor wasn't finished. "The fire started in the basement, didn't it, Elena? Right where they kept you locked up at night. Such a convenient accident, especially considering how the insurance investigators found traces of accelerant near your sleeping area." "I didn't start that fire," Elena whispered, but even as she spoke, she remembered the camping stove she'd hidden under her makeshift bed, the only source of heat during Chicago's brutal winter months. She remembered falling asleep while it was still burning, waking to the smell of smoke and the sound of screaming from upstairs. "Of course you didn't," Victor continued, his tone mockingly gentle. "Just like you didn't know what black roses meant when you delivered them to Pietro's gate. You have a talent for being present when terrible things happen to terrible people." Pietro stood abruptly, moving toward Victor with deadly purpose. "I warned you. Pietro, stop." Elena caught his arm, surprising herself with her own calm voice. "He's trying to manipulate us both. Whatever happened that night, it was an accident. I was a child trying to survive in an impossible situation." She turned to face Victor directly, meeting his pale eyes without flinching. "You're right about one thing. I'm not completely innocent anymore. Being around Pietro has taught me that sometimes violence is the only language that monsters understand." Elena reached into her purse and withdrew the small pistol Pietro had given her for protection, the weight of it familiar in her hands after hours of training with Giuseppe. Victor's smirk faltered as she pointed the weapon directly at his chest, her grip steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "You destroyed my shop, threatened my life, and used people I cared about as weapons against me," Elena said quietly. "But your mistake was thinking I'd remain helpless while you played your games." The sound of the gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, followed by Victor's scream of pain as the bullet shattered his kneecap. Elena lowered the pistol, her hands perfectly steady as she met Pietro's shocked gaze. "Now we can negotiate surrender terms," she said calmly. "Victor understands the consequences of refusing, and you understand that I'm not the same woman who delivered flowers last week." Pietro stared at her with something between admiration and concern, recognizing that Elena had crossed a line from victim to active participant in his dangerous world. The transformation was complete. She was no longer an innocent caught in the crossfire, but a woman who'd chosen to fight back against the forces that had tried to destroy her. Victor writhed in his chair, blood flowing freely from his wounded leg, his arrogance replaced by genuine fear, as he realized that Elena represented a new kind of threat, someone with nothing left to lose, and the determination to make her enemies pay for their mistakes. The war between the families was over, but Elena's evolution from florist to something far more dangerous had just begun. She'd proven she could pull the trigger when necessary, and both Pietro and Victor understood that she would never again be underestimated by anyone who threatened what she'd chosen to protect. 6 months later, Elena DeLuca stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office overlooking Lake Michigan, watching cargo ships navigate the harbor while reviewing shipping manifests for Pietro's legitimate import business. The autumn sunlight caught the diamonds in her wedding ring, casting rainbow patterns across the mahogany desk that had once intimidated her, but now felt like a natural extension of her authority. The transformation from florist to crime boss's wife had been more dramatic than she'd ever imagined possible. But Elena had discovered talents for organization and strategic thinking that surprised everyone, including herself. What had begun as helping Pietro manage his legitimate business interests had evolved into partnership in ways that extended far beyond their marriage certificate. The Nightingale shipment cleared customs without inspection, Giuseppe reported from the doorway, his massive frame filling the space as he delivered the weekly intelligence briefing. Our contact at the Port Authority confirmed all documentation was accepted without question. Elena nodded, making notes in the coded ledger that tracked their various operations. The Nightingale shipments contained medical supplies for the network of clinics Pietro funded throughout Chicago's underserved neighborhoods. But they also provided cover for more sensitive cargo that helped maintain their territorial agreements with other families. "Any word from our friends in Milwaukee about the Torino situation?" Elena asked, referring to a rival family attempting to expand into their pharmaceutical distribution territory. "Handled quietly," Giuseppe replied. "No complications, no police involvement. The Torinos have agreed to focus their attention on cities where they won't encounter resistance from established operations." The language of violence had become as familiar to Elena as flower arrangements once were, though she preferred solutions that didn't require bloodshed. Her background in customer service had translated surprisingly well to managing criminal negotiations, understanding what people really wanted, finding compromises that let everyone save face, knowing when to appear sympathetic and when to project strength. Pietro emerged from the private elevator that connected their office to the residential floors above, carrying 2 cups of espresso and wearing the slight smile that had become more frequent since Viktor Kozlenko's permanent departure from Chicago 6 months ago. The Russian had been shipped back to Moscow in several different containers, his organization's assets absorbed into the DeLuca empire through careful negotiation with federal authorities who'd been convinced that cooperation served everyone's interests. "The Henderson proposal came through," Pietro said, settling into the chair beside Elena's desk rather than behind his own. "They've agreed to our terms for the Riverside Development Project." Elena accepted her espresso with a kiss that still sent electricity through her system despite 6 months of marriage. The legitimate development projects had become her specialty, using her understanding of city planning and community needs to identify profitable opportunities that also provided genuine benefits to Chicago's neighborhoods. "What about the community center we discussed?" Elena asked. "The one with the youth programs and job training facilities?" "Already included in the architectural plans. Maria is coordinating with the contractors to ensure construction begins by spring." Pietro's expression softened as he watched Elena review the development contracts. "You realize you're becoming more ruthless in business negotiations than I am? The Henderson Group was terrified of disappointing you after that last meeting." Elena laughed, remembering how she'd quietly suggested that disappointed business partners sometimes experienced unfortunate accidents in Pietro's world. The threat had been subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but clear enough to ensure rapid agreement to their terms. "I learned from the best," she replied, though they both understood that Elena's approach to power was fundamentally different from the intimidation tactics that had built the DeLuca empire. She preferred psychological pressure to physical violence, economic leverage to direct confrontation, and she'd proven remarkably effective at expanding their influence through methods that attracted less law enforcement attention. The phone on Elena's desk buzzed with the distinctive tone that indicated secure communication from their network of informants. She answered with the business-like efficiency that had become second nature. "Mrs. DeLuca speaking." "Ma'am, this is Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit. We have developments on the Torino investigation you might find interesting. Elena activated the encryption protocol and switched to speaker mode so Pietro could monitor the conversation. Detective Morrison was one of several law enforcement officials who'd discovered that cooperation with the De Luca organization often provided better results than traditional police work, especially when dealing with criminals who showed less restraint than Pietro's operation. What kind of developments, Detective? The Torinos were laundering money through medical supply companies, just like you suspected. We followed the paper trail you provided and uncovered a network of fake pharmaceutical distributors operating across 6 states. The arrests should happen within the next 48 hours. Elena made notes in her encrypted files, already calculating how the Torino family's collapse would affect territory distribution and business opportunities throughout the Midwest. Pietro had taught her to think several moves ahead, anticipating consequences and preparing responses before problems became crises. Excellent work, Detective. Will there be any complications regarding our medical supply operations? Your companies are completely clean, ma'am. The documentation you provided proved that your pharmaceutical distributions are legitimate charitable operations with proper DEA oversight. In fact, your cooperation in this investigation will probably result in expanded licenses for controlled substances distribution. Elena smiled, appreciating how her legitimate charitable work provided perfect cover for their more questionable activities. The clinics they funded genuinely helped thousands of people throughout Chicago, but they also created relationships with medical professionals who occasionally needed favors that only the De Luca organization could provide. After ending the call, Elena found Pietro watching her with the same mixture of admiration and slight concern that had become familiar during their months of partnership. She'd proven capable of matching his strategic thinking and exceeding his diplomatic skills, but her rapid adaptation to criminal life sometimes worried him. "Any regrets?" Pietro asked quietly, the question that had become routine between them during moments of reflection. Elena considered the question seriously, as she always did. 6 months ago, she'd been struggling to pay rent while working 14-hour days at a job that barely covered her expenses. Now she managed a multi-million-dollar operation, lived in luxury beyond her previous imagination, and wielded influence that extended throughout Chicago's political and business communities. But more importantly, she'd found purpose that extended beyond mere survival. The charitable projects, the community development initiatives, even the way they'd restructured their criminal operations to minimize harm to innocent people. It all represented the kind of positive impact she'd dreamed of making, but never had the resources to attempt. "No regrets," Elena replied, meaning it completely. "I've never been more useful or more fulfilled than I am now." Pietro's smile became the genuine expression of contentment that had replaced his earlier mask of controlled authority. "Maria is preparing dinner on the terrace tonight. She mentioned something about celebrating 6 months of marriage and discussing plans for expanding the family." Elena's heart skipped at the implication, though they'd been discussing children for weeks. The idea of raising a family within the world they'd built together no longer frightened her. Their empire was stable, their enemies eliminated, and their legitimate businesses provided cover for a lifestyle that could appear completely normal to outside observers. "Tell Maria we'll need champagne," Elena replied, standing to straighten Pietro's tie in a gesture that had become their private ritual. "And perhaps we should start planning the nursery. The room overlooking the garden would be perfect." As the sun set over Lake Michigan, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her from delivering black roses to building an empire, alongside the man who'd initially terrified her. The florist who'd answered a wrong number 6 months ago was gone forever, replaced by a woman capable of navigating the most dangerous waters of power and influence. But at its core, their story remained what it had always been. 2 people who'd found in each other the perfect partner for building something beautiful from the thorny complexity of real life. The black roses that had brought them together now bloomed in their private garden, a reminder that even the darkest beginnings could grow into something worth protecting with absolute ruthlessness. Elena De Luca had never imagined that love could be cultivated from violence and fear, but she'd learned that the strongest foundations were built from surviving the worst storms together.